Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome Sankrant Sanu, who I have known for since I was maybe 5 years old. So Sankrant was my roommate in IIT Kanpur as well, and he's a superb software engineer. He was one of the early people at Microsoft, but over the last maybe couple of decades now, he has been focusing on how to improve education in India. And the key point that he has identified is that education in India cannot be improved unless it is delivered in the language that of the people, the mother tongues. And so we're glad to welcome him, and he will talk a little more about what all he's been observing and how he plans to further this idea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vineet. And when Vineet got on the stage, I was afraid he's going to tell a lot of our IIT Kanpur stories. But I'm glad we got spared of it because being a roommate, the roommate is privy to everything that goes on. So it's always dangerous to have your roommate introduce you. But Vineet is very, very decent, as we all know. So all the juicy stuff got kept out. I'm very glad of that. So welcome, everybody. My name is Sankrant Sanu. The slides that you're seeing on the screen are in Hindi, and there is a reason for it, which I'll explain. But my talk will be in English for the Google audience, since there are many different people tuning in here. The Google story itself for me goes a little while back. Actually, in the 90s, I was working on search and crawling technology at Microsoft, actually trying to convince them that search is important. They never got convinced, really, not in time. But some of my patents from crawling technology are from the 90s at Microsoft. That was the time of Alta Vista and Excite, dating myself here. Many people would probably never have heard of those, but those are the search engines that were the big search engines at that time. And then in 2000, I did a Bay Area startup. The office was in Sunnyvale. And Ram Sriram, who was one of the original people who were helping manage Google at that time, had come, and the Bay Area startup was around ad optimization technology. So both of the core businesses of Google, in one way, the search business, and then the ad optimization business, there was some parallelism going on and some possibility of collaboration, which is why Ram Sriram had come, visited us at that time. And then over the course of next several years, I escaped being recruited by Google a couple of times. But my friends who didn't escape did quite well. So it's good. It's good in both directions. I'm really, really happy to be here and talking to Google folks. So the presentation is really about the Indian education system in a sense, and what is going on in India. And of course, it has applicability to many other developing countries and countries that were colonized in the past. But it's a problem which is very acute in India, and there are several reasons for it. So the book that I have is called The English Medium Myth. And in fact, we have the second edition of that and a preview version that just got shipped to me today. So the first time I saw it. So the second edition of it is coming out, will be released officially in August. When the book is called The English Medium Myth. And the book is exploring, in India, it's become almost something taken for granted, an article of faith that English is the key to India's progress. In fact, a lot of people say that English is why India has done well in software, why we have an IT industry. And so there are a number of myths that developed. And as a result, English is being pushed deeper and deeper today on the primary level as well. And so we'll look at the implications. What does it mean for that to happen? And is English really the vehicle for progress? So first, and again, as I mentioned, the slides are in Hindi. For India, I don't actually advocate Hindi. I advocate mother tongue. So I advocate all Indian languages. And also, if I'm a good presenter, you wouldn't really have to care what the slides say so much. So don't worry about it if you cannot read it. The slides have very little text, and what text is there, it'll be apparent from what I say. So the first question is one of the myths in India is the entire world is using English, and so it is important for India to use English. But if you actually look at the stats, less than 10% of the world uses English. Only about 5% of the world has English as their primary language, and about 4% know it as a second language or a third language. So the footprint of English is much smaller in the world than we imagine. The second myth is that, okay, even if the whole world isn't using English, certainly the countries who are progressing, the countries who are developed, they must certainly be using English. So one of the things, the kind of back of the envelope calculation I did in my book was I looked at the top 20 countries in GDP per capita, and I looked at the bottom 20 countries in GDP per capita. And what I found was that out of the top 20 countries, only about 4 were using English for their education system and English for their government systems, for their entire setup. And out of the bottom 20, more were using English. Not only that, out of the top 20 countries, every single one was doing education in the mother tongue. So every single one was providing higher education in the mass language of the people, in the common languages of the people. And out of the bottom 20, the poorest countries, 18 out of 20 or 19 out of 20 were not providing the facility to learn in your mother tongue in higher education. So what we find is that the poorest countries are those that are neglecting their languages and going to some colonial language. And the richest countries are developing and investing in their own languages for higher education, including for technical education. So this is something to remember. And again, we are not saying that causation and causality are the same thing. The causality is definitely linked to colonialism and the impact of colonialism. But the idea that to progress, again, this is an idea or a myth in India that for development English is needed. That is certainly falsified by the data, that it's not the case at all. So if you look at different countries around the world, somebody might be able to guess what is the top right here. Israel, yeah. Top right is Technion Institute in Israel. Language is Hebrew. The left side is the University of Tokyo, which is one of the leading universities in medical science. All their work is done in Japanese. And then below that is Germany. Yeah, so robotics work. They are doing all the very advanced technology robotic work using German. And of course, the bottom right is French, and this is the management institute. So if you want to get a management degree, you will learn in French. So all kinds of what we call the modern world, whether we're talking about modern medicine, whether we're talking about high technology, we're talking about robotics, we're talking about management, the modern world does not require English. All of these very modern subjects are being taught in all these different countries in their own language. The other important thing to note about India is that in India, the notion of status has become linked to English. So in English, in India means high status. So if you go to a 5-star hotel, you're only supposed to talk in English, or the receptionist will talk to you in English. If you see the ad for an expensive car, and what car is this? Okay, so we have an Audi there, and this photograph, I think I took this in a railway station in China. So in a railway station in China, the ad for an Audi, and the lettering, of course, is in Chinese. All the pitch is in Chinese. So it is not that the wealthy people know English or are supposed to know English. It is not that the technically educated or savvy people are working in English. All over the world, people are working in their own languages, and English is neither a reflection of status nor a reflection of technical advancement. This is a interesting picture. This is actually in Beijing. Person on the left is my daughter. So we'd all gone to Beijing, and we went to a restaurant. This is a high-end restaurant in Beijing, and we expected in a high-end restaurant in Beijing, a lot of tourists will come, and there were a lot of tourists, and they would definitely have staff that would speak English. To our surprise, we found that not one person from the waiter to the top manager of the restaurant spoke a word of English. In fact, my daughter wanted to eat Peking duck, which is a very famous thing, and they didn't even know the phrase Peking duck. We said Peking duck to them, and they didn't know what we were talking about. But they all had high-end smartphones. And what they did was they handed us their phones and they asked us to type in English. And when we typed in English, they hit translate using Baidu Translate, and they would end up reading it in Chinese and they would take our order. So they had no problem whatsoever with technology. They were all very happy. They were all very excited. They were chattering about and getting our order, but they felt no need for English. And in India, the situation is you go to a dhaba on the road and you'll find that the menu is only in English. Okay. This is because in our mind, we have decided, and we have to hire a waiter. We are making a requirement for a waiter on a dhaba on the roadside. We are making it a requirement this waiter should know English. Why? No reason. It is only a reason is we have internalized this notion that somehow English means high status. There's a requirement for English. The customer will come in. The customer will know very little English. The waiter will know even less English, but they will try to speak in English or expect that the order be in English. Again, it is something which is, if you look at it, it is almost a nonsensical system. But this is where we are going. One of the excuses that the government gives, and I'll talk about the role of the government. Why has the situation been created in India? One of the excuses that the government is giving today, and the government is making a big push to English even for primary education, is saying that the people want English. So again, one of the myth making that has happened is that the government pushes Indian languages, especially there's a lot of resistance or saying that, the government is pushing Hindi, it's pushing Hindi in the South, it's imposing Hindi. The government is pushing Hindi. This is one of the assumptions or one of the ideas that we have. The people want English, but the government is pushing Hindi. What is the reality? The reality is, if you look at the top 10 newspapers in India, only one of the top 10 newspapers is an English newspaper. Okay, the rest of the newspapers in India by circulation are all Indian language newspapers, whether it be a Malayalam newspaper or a Hindi newspaper or a Marathi newspaper. So when people have a choice, newspaper is not something that the government decides which newspaper you'll read. When people have a choice, they like to read in their own language. And if you look at television, it's even more dramatic. So if you look at the television channel, the television channels in India, the English television channels are barely even 1%. So when people have a choice, they neither want to read English, nor do they want to listen to English. Okay, so the very idea that people want it is incorrect. However, there is an element of this, which is that the people are rushing to English because there is a government system that forces them to go to English. And what kind of government system is it? I will talk about this also. What kind of government system it is? The government imposes English only higher education. So the only language that is being forced by the government is English. It says you can only study in all of the IITs, all of the IIMs, all of the AIMS, all of these top institutes are only English. So the government says if you have to study in them, you can only study in English. So who's imposing English? It's directly from the government policy. If you go to the Supreme Court, you can only practice in English. No Hindi is allowed in the Supreme Court. No other Indian language is allowed in the Supreme Court. You can only practice in English. All the judgments can only be in English. Most of the high courts, other than 4 high courts, all of the high courts you can only practice in English. So you cannot practice in the Madras High Court in Tamil. You cannot practice in the Karnataka High Court in Kannada. So at every level, in every institution, in every system of the state, English is being imposed. And this has created this mad rush to English because people are saying that if I have to give a job, if I have to pass an interview, if I have to give an entrance exam, in most cases, those are only in English. And we'll look at it a little bit later. So the state is responsible. Well, one of the other interesting factors here is actually, and people are saying English is rising so much in English. One of the other arguments is that it's a fait accompli. People tell me I'm going against the tide. It's impossible because everybody is already using English in India. How could this ever be changed? But the fact of the matter is, if I look at newspapers, for instance, English as a percentage has actually come down. If you look at the graph here, this orange line, it shows English. It starts at about 30% close to independence, and the percentage of English newspaper has declined from 30% to about 12%. So what that means is, and even those that are being circulated, I have talked to people, they say, sir, hum padhte to Hindi hain. We only read the Hindi newspaper. I was talking to somebody in Rajasthan in this case. But we keep the English newspaper for show. So we order the English newspaper because it looks nice that we have an English newspaper in our office, but we only read the Hindi newspaper. So these kinds of stories are. But even with that, English newspaper circulation has actually come down. It's only about 12% of the total. And the same phenomenon is happening on the internet as well. Many people might already know. I'm sitting at Google, so Google is certainly tracking this. That in that Indian language usage of the internet is already exceeding English internet usage in India. So even on the internet, the shift is happening. It's following what people actually want to read. So that shift is there. So one of the questions people ask me, and I myself went to an English medium school in India, and my dear friend Vineet is sitting here. We went to the same school in Chandigarh. And one of the questions people ask me is, why did I decide to start this advocacy for Indian languages? And there were many incidents that happened. One of the incidents was that when I was at Microsoft, I ended up visiting different countries. I visited Israel, and I was very surprised to find that our Microsoft Haifa office used Hebrew internally completely. Their PowerPoints were in Hebrew, their design documents were in Hebrew, their discussions were in Hebrew. Everything in the internally to the office was Hebrew, and this was a software multinational Microsoft, and this was happening in their Israel office. And of course, we know a lot of high tech is coming, technology is coming from Israel. Their top engineering colleges, Technion, all are Hebrew medium, and they are doing self-driving car technology. There's a big acquisition by Intel. So all these countries are using their own languages, and that was sort of the first shock to my system, because I assumed that all the high-tech work is going on in English, but obviously that's not true. So when I was in Thailand, I was surprised to see that all of the Thai, and Thai is very close to Sanskrit. Even if you look at the script on that number plate, you'll be able to see it is close to Devanagari or Brahmi. It's actually derived from Brahmi script. So there is a lot of resemblance in the vocabulary, but they are using a Sanskrit-based language for all of their higher education. Again, if you go to Japan, if you look at the very corner there's a little robotic checkout system there, which is interacting in Japanese. It speaks Japanese. So when I'm visiting these different countries, I go into libraries, go into universities, see how people are actually studying, and you find that they are all using their own languages. They're doing. Japan is a very, very high tech society. In some ways, it's a much more high tech society than the US is. But all of their high tech is developed and is embraced in their own languages. In fact, there is a story to that as well. Even if you look at Europe and what happened in Europe, when the scientific revolution takes place in Europe, there is also a linguistic change that's happening in Europe. Earlier, higher education in Europe is happening in which language? It's happening in Latin and Greek, mostly in Latin, because the church influence, and the church was responsible for many of the universities, and so the language of education is Latin. When Europe's education moves from Latin to the so-called vernaculars, the vernaculars in this case are French and Italian and Spanish and English and so on and so forth, is when scientific progress starts to really happen in Europe as well. The development of ideas happens very rapidly when education moves into the vernaculars. And the Japan and Chinese examples are also very interesting. In Japan, very early on, they did translations of the Japanese works, of English works into Japanese. And there were local Japanese translators who learned English, who did the translations. And so they got a stride ahead in technology. In China, they kind of lagged behind, in part because they were letting the English people who had learned some Chinese do the translation into Chinese. And so when they actually got to more of doing the translations themselves, so native Chinese people doing translations, then the grasp of technology starts to increase. So the pattern that we see over and over again is that knowledge becomes one's own when that knowledge comes to you in your own language. So that is when you really have, and now you have neuroscientists that are starting to study. My new book has a foreword by Dr. Ghosh, who is at the Harvard Medical School. And one of the researches he is doing is in early childhood development. And one of the hypotheses he's forming is that the mother tongue is almost like is forming the operating system of the brain. The verbal operating system of the brain is being formed in the mother tongue. And so that is where the conceptual map is being developed using that language. And when you have a language shift, then there is a transition, then you have a translation problem. So the speed slows down because there's a translation problem. And when the child is learning in their mother tongue, the acquisition of their knowledge is much faster. And somebody told me the statistics. I haven't personally gone through every single case to look at it, but perhaps somebody can tell me a counterexample. But as far as I know, every single Nobel Prize winner in science did their primary education in their mother tongue, or they did primary education in the not in the language that was spoken at home, or the language that they were most familiar with. So rapid, and UNESCO has guidelines since 1950, based on various scientific researches, that mother tongue education is shown to be the best for the development of the child, and it's the most accessible to the child. So there's plenty of evidence on this. And secondly, one of the myths I had to counter myself was, because I had studied in English, I had looked at all the science and technology in English. I was like, how do they even do it? How do they study science and programming in Japanese? Right? So I had all these myths. I thought it wasn't possible. And when I go into the library, I pick up a book on TCP/IP, I pick up a book on C++ programming. And what you find is, except for the few keywords, that because of and those are very small. If you look at the vocabulary of C++, it's a very small set of keywords. Except for the small set of keywords, all of the explanations, all of the strings they are using, everything will be in Japanese. And again, they grasp that much faster. Japanese are very avid tourists. They go all over the world. They have no problem going all over the world because they are avid tourists. They are local people who speak Japanese. They'll have Japanese guides. All their tour books are in Japanese. In fact, my hypothesis is, and it's really nice to say this in Google because Google is doing so much work in this area, is that within 10 years, even the importance of English as a language of tourism is going to decline. English is actually going to decline. And why is it going to decline? Because within 10 years, we will have simultaneous audio translation to develop to an extent where I can speak Bhojpuri in Japan and the person will understand Japanese, and the Japanese person can speak to me, and in my ear, I'll hear Bhojpuri, right? Absolutely no reason. We already have the technology. Google is already developing it. Other companies are developing it. So we already have technology advancing rapidly where simultaneous audio translation will take care of even the minimalistic use that happens today in customs or in tourism for English usage. So the way I look at it is that the world is multilingual today, and it will become increasingly multilingual tomorrow, except for one country which is hell-bent on supporting English, and that country is India. So if English survives, it's actually going to be because of India, because India has this craze for English, and it's the maximum. It's creating the maximum number of new English learners. So English is not helping India progress. India is helping English progress. India is what is sustaining English in the world today. So what we have to do is, and at a great cost to itself. India is helping English progress at a great cost to itself. And what is the cost? The cost is that 90% of our talent is being sidelined. 90% of our talent is being told you are worthless, you're of no use, you are not intelligent, you don't have any brains. Why? Not because you cannot do logic, you cannot do math, you cannot do programming, just because you cannot speak English. So we are sacrificing India's development and India's talent in this mad rush for English. And many more examples. This is actually the very beautiful library that in Alexandria, there was a library that was burnt down couple of thousand years ago, maybe a little less, in Egypt. a very famous library. And so Egypt reconstructed this library, and there's a library in Alexandria. Again, the card catalog is in Arabic, and programming language books are in Arabic. So all over the world, you will see people are using their languages. Uh, so this is what language is that? So this is Chinese. Okay, so Chinese language. And again, when I was first starting on this journey, as I said, I myself, all these myths that I'm talking about are myths of mine. So I was saying, how do we learn? It's impossible. How could you learn programming in a different language? And then I started collecting these books. So this book is interestingly a book written in Chinese. It's a book on Python. It's written by an Indian. The Indian writes the book in English, and then the Chinese translate it to Chinese, and this is how they're studying Python programming. But the Indian person does not write the book in any Indian language. So this is kind of the irony that we are faced with. Another argument that is given is that in India, especially when I talk to people, they said, but how will we get jobs? All the multinationals operate in English. If you want a great job, you will have to use English. Couple of points here. Firstly, I'm not against English per se. All I'm saying is that we need to create an ecosystem for Indian languages so that Indian language learners are not made into second-class citizens. They also have an equal opportunity. So we need to have higher education, we need to have court systems, we need to have all these systems also operate in Indian languages. So it's not a question of excluding English. Secondly, if you actually look at the multinational corporations, so many of these multinational corporations are from Asian countries, and even the multinational corporations coming from European countries. Their native languages and the languages that they're using in headquarters is not English. If you go into Toyota headquarters, internally they're not using English. All these multinational corporations are using, out of the 1,000 major multinational companies in Asia, 792 are just from 3 countries: Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. Okay, and each of them is using their own language. And so when let's see which is each of these icons. The top left one is Toyota, and then the right one is obviously Samsung, and then bottom right Hyundai, and then LG, right? So all of these are representing from these countries. And if you look at it, when Samsung is in South Korea, their headquarters, they are using Korean language. The CEO of Samsung did their MBA in Korean. And when Samsung goes to Thailand, they use Thai language, right? They recruit in Thai language. Their jobs are in Thai language. When Samsung goes to Germany, they're recruiting in German, and their jobs are in German. When they go to India, then they recruit in English. So is this a problem of Samsung, or is this a problem of India? Right? It is India that is saying, no, we only want English. It is not Samsung. The multinational corporation is multilingual. Globalization has localization built into it. Globalization does not mean English. Globalization is localization. A globalized company is very sensitive to language. Everywhere they go, they will use the language of that locale, right? But because of India's apathy and India's push for English is why these multinational companies are only offering jobs in India in English. This is not based on the multinational, but based on the India's own system that we've created. So lots of examples. This is Thailand, ad for Samsung phones in Thailand. Again, all using Thai languages. Similarly, I gave the examples of Nobel Prize winners. If you go and look at the list of Nobel Prize winners, Japan is producing so many Nobel Prize winners. They are doing higher education in Japanese. They are doing research work in Japanese. Just in the last few years in medicine and physics, these are just the winners in the last few years that are in Japan using Japanese. So there is in fact, India hasn't produced one in decades who's in India and who's getting a Nobel Prize in science. So neither in science nor in technology nor in big business is English a requirement. And what we have done in India, though, is that because of making it a requirement, we are actually following a policy of exclusion, where we've excluded so many people from development, from technology, from learning the subject natively. So a lot of people are saying even the engineering graduates that India is producing, their understanding is very weak, because a lot of times they're doing rote learning. They're most of their time is just struggling with the language, trying to understand what is happening. We're just regurgitating what is being taught to us without actually grappling with the subjects itself, except for a very small elite section that have spoken English from their childhood. So one of the consequences of the state pushing English is that there is a mad rush to English today in India. And in fact, people tell me, oh, why are you pushing this? Because even in the village, parents want to send their children to English medium schools. It is true, this is happening. Why is it happening? Because, as I said, the state policy constantly pushes English. So if your higher education is in English and there's a lot of transition problem because there's no opportunity to study in your own language, then you say you might as well do high school in English. Then you say you might as well do primary in English, or you do middle school in English. So English is being pushed down because of the state itself saying you cannot practice, you cannot do, if you want to file a tax in Malayalam, the government is happy to take your money, but they're not happy to have the income tax service talk to you in Malayalam. The forms are only in English or Hindi. So it is natural that people would resent the imposition of language, which sometimes turns into an anti-Hindi thing. But for me, more interesting is to enable all the languages of India, to enable all the... There's absolutely no reason why the government cannot cater to all the official languages in India. So as a result of government policy, what is happening is you have these children who are studying in English medium schools in rural areas. And I interviewed one such girl recently. I've started a publication house for propagating Indian languages. And I interviewed this girl, and this young woman had come there, and she wanted, this was for a secretarial job. So given the setup in India, I actually interviewed the programmer in Hindi because I couldn't care less how his English was. So I interviewed the programmer in Hindi. I hired him, no problem. The same day, I was interviewing a secretarial position, and the correspondence she'd be required to do would also be in English. So this person came, and her resume said that she had studied in English medium school for 12 years in a rural setting. And I gave her 10 minutes. I said, a customer has this query, or this shipment is delayed or whatever, and you have to reply to them. And she spent 10 minutes and she could not compose a single sentence of English. And after that, I asked her, you studied in English medium for 12 years. How is it that you cannot write one sentence of English? And I have her interview recorded, actually. I asked her permission to record. And she says, sir, kya batao? What shall I tell you? These so-called English medium schools, the teachers don't understand English. The students the teachers understand little bit English. The students don't understand it at all. So what, in the name of English medium, you can only actually teach in Hindi, otherwise you can't even communicate, right? So you have put the English medium board, you're communicating in whatever language you manage to go back. How can you teach students who don't even understand English by using the medium of English? I mean, if you think about it, it's completely absurd, right? So this absurdity is being pushed, and we are calling it progress, that now people in the villages are also craving English medium. But the result of that progress is we are completely destroying the minds of an entire generation. These children are completely incapable. The children who are studying in their mother tongue in a rural area at least understand the subject, right? What is being taught. But the children who are studying in English medium in these rural areas can neither write in their mother tongue, nor can they write in English, nor do they understand any subject whatsoever. So we are saying that we are going to compete internationally by pushing English. We're going to compete with China, which is making leaps and bounds in artificial intelligence, by having children who are completely crippled, who cannot even do cannot reason logically, who have no math skills, all because of this mad rush for English. So is this going to help India compete or develop? And as I said, there are enormous scientific study. In fact, I would like to see any counter study. There is no study that I know of that says that you take a set of children, you teach them in their mother tongue, and you take another set of children and you teach them in a language foreign to their mother tongue, and you test them, and you see which one has a higher grasp of the subject matter. So this is a big study that was done for Telugu medium in Andhra Pradesh, and they found that that children after 8th grade, they evaluated children who are going to Telugu medium school and children who are going to English medium school. And the English medium school children were actually more affluent. They were often from a richer background than from the Telugu medium school. But the Telugu medium children's grasp of math and science was much higher than the grasp of the English medium school children. So the result of the language policy is really this sort of mass dumbing down of the population, which is neither able to understand or work in their own languages nor in English. And this is the only slide with text on it. But this is I took a little excerpt because this I'm very excited to have Dr. Ghosh write an introduction, a foreword to the new edition of my book. And he is at Harvard, the hospital associated with Harvard Medical School, and he came across my work. He was very excited, and he wanted to speak to me. And so one of his researches more and more is concluding is that as I said, in some senses, the mother tongue is setting up the operating system of the brain, is the language of the operating system of the brain that is set up even from prenatal times. So now the contemporary research is showing that language acquisition actually begins in the womb. The child is starting to acquire language in the womb. And when the child is tested right when they're born, they show a greater recognition of the language that the mother had used in the womb. So mother tongue is actually a scientific notion. Literally the language that the mother is speaking. And then later on we find that there is higher receptivity to that language, and that language forms sort of the conceptual verbal operating system of the brain, and this is how you grasp other languages as well. So in fact what we find is that the children who are studying in their mother tongue later on are able to grasp even English better because they have a stronger conceptual system to understand one language. So from one language it is better, it is easier to transition into another languages. So this is something to think about. And then of course the mad rush to English is being pushed by the government. All the institutions of the government top down push it. One very interesting story about UPSC, there was a lot of agitation. So UPSC is for the civil services, for the top bureaucrats in the country. So after a lot of agitation, the weightage of English is now lesser in UPSC than it used to be. But if you want to become a sub-inspector in India, you take this exam called SSC, Staff Selection Commission exam. And in SSC, the weightage of English is almost 2/3. So even for somebody who wants to be a sub-inspector in UP, you're saying your only skill that matters to you is whether you know English or not. Almost your entire ability to do math, ability to reason, your moral fiber, all of that is completely irrelevant. The only measure that we care about as a state is whether you know English or not. So after all of this, the key question that often comes up for me is, what is the solution? And people say, well, the examples of the countries you are giving, like Japan, to some extent China, although it's not so accurate, and Germany, all these countries have one language. And so what will we do in India, which has so many languages? Well, one way to look at this is, we have to look at the size of the human resource in India. India is of continental proportions. The population of India is 1.5 times that of Europe. If all of Europe was one country, India would still be 1.5 times bigger than that in terms of human resources. In fact, India is bigger than every other continent in population, other than Asia, which it is part of. India is bigger than Europe, it is bigger than North America, it is bigger than South America, it is bigger than all of Africa in population. This is how big India is. So you cannot have a monolingual solution for India. The answer is not English, and it is also not Hindi. I am not at all proposing that Hindi be imposed on all the people of India. And India has never worked like that. India has never been a monolingual country. And India has always been a multilingual country, and it stands to reason because we are such a huge population base. And we have very, very well developed languages. If you look at each of the languages of India, if you look at Tamil, if you look at Kannada, if you look at Malayalam, if you look at Marathi, you look at Bengali, these are huge, rich languages with centuries of literature in it, centuries of work in it, scientific literature in Malayalam in Sanskrit and all these languages. So to say we can just discard all these and make everybody go to one language is absurd, and there is no need to do that. What we need to do is look at the solutions that the European Union has followed. And one of the things that the European Union does is that all 24 languages of the European Union are official languages for the European Union. What does that mean? Any of those 24 languages can be used to communicate with the European Union. By law, the European Union must release all its laws and regulations in all 24 languages. I can email the European Union in any of those 24 languages and I will get a reply in the same language. I can call the European Union in any of those 24 languages and I will be routed to an appropriate call center and I can talk to somebody in my own language. Okay. So this is exactly the solution that the government of India, the union government, has to employ. Why is it, as I was mentioning, that the income tax department of the government of India is happy extorting taxes from all of its citizens all over the country, but is only willing to speak in two languages? Right? And even that one language very poorly. People say the government is pushing Hindi, but if you look at the quality of the Hindi websites, it's abysmal. You can hardly even understand what the website is saying. So the only language that the government is really supporting is English. Rather than that, it needs to go to support all 22 languages, so that somebody in Chennai has a question that needs to be resolved, they should be able to call their government up in their own language. We are not asking for any miracle here. We're saying if the union government represents all of the is part of all of the people of India, it needs to speak their language, and this is completely doable. In fact, it is easier to implement this today than it was 70 years ago. Technology has made this easier. We can easily have a portal which can route to the appropriate people, route to the do automated translation, then make that document go to the appropriate language team. It gets transcribed into whatever language the person. So all of this is very, very easy with technology today, much easier than it was 70 years ago. So there's absolutely no need for India to go into to English or even to Hindi. There is no need for that. We can support each of the languages. And also the other flip of that is the principle to govern Indian language development with should be that every child should be able to study to the highest level in their own language. So we are not talking about excluding a language. I don't even want to exclude English. I am saying include more languages. We need to have an inclusive language policy that is including as many languages as possible. So sometimes people get very, and there is some reason for that also. People will get very angry about something. They might be opposing Hindi, they might be opposing something, they want to deface a sign which has Hindi. And I say very easy way to answer whether you're on the right track is to say, are you creating inclusion or are you creating exclusion? Erasing a language on a sign is saying I want to exclude something, right? Adding another language to that sign, sorry about that. Adding another language to the sign means you are including more people. So we need to figure out systems and policies which are including more people rather than excluding people. Okay, so as I said, with technology, these things are going to becoming easier. Google and so many other companies are enabling technologies that make the multilingual world easier, right? So India's real path to development is to embrace that multilingual world. And then the question is, what will be the common language? What will be the linked language? I say have a moratorium on that question. That is the only question we've been trying to deal with in the 70 years, and we get stuck. As soon as we start asking the question, we get stuck. Rather than ask that question, let's create a policy of enablement which says let every child study to the highest language, and what is the common language of discourse, they will automatically evolve it. We won't have to fix that solution. The government's job is empowerment. The government's job should be every child in their language to the highest level, whether they want to do medicine, whether they want to do engineering, whether they want to do MBA, whether they want to do CA, that the government needs to enable. And for enabling this, we require a commitment to language. And I'm putting this example of how committed the Chinese are to their language. And the Chinese are making very rapid technical progress in the last few years. And earlier I'd heard the story that the Chinese were pushing English. In fact, the Supreme Court of India also said, in some judgment quoted this, that, oh, even China, everybody, the government is pushing English, everybody is learning English, and we are being backwards by not pushing English in India. But the fact of the matter is, if you go to China, you walk on the street, you'd hardly find people understanding English. Very, very, very few people on the street will know English. Not only that, China is now making an explicit push to propagate Chinese. So they are propagating Chinese worldwide. They are opening Chinese centers. They have a huge, massive translation project. How massive? This was a tweet, actually a Facebook post by Andrew at Stanford, and he was saying, he's a professor at Stanford in computer science, and he was saying, I'm amazed at how quickly machine learning work, cutting edge machine learning work, just a blog, the self-published machine learning work is being translated within 24 hours in Chinese language, let alone textbooks, let alone research papers that are in standard publications. Even self-published blogs, the Chinese are translating within 24 hours to Chinese language. This is the kind of commitment that the Chinese are putting into making sure that the knowledge appears in their own language. And this is one of the reasons, at least is my hypothesis, that they're making so much rapid technical progress in China. In India, people, when I say we need higher education in Indian languages, there is all these obstacles. So they'll say, "Arey, there's no textbooks. How are you ever going to do it? Okay, where is the material?" Well, the material is not going to come out of thin air. We have to have the commitment, and we have to create the material. So the material has to be created by us. Who else is going to do it? The government has to do it, or the people are going to do it. So now the government's ability to create material is kind of limited. So one interesting study, when Arabic science was at its peak, there was a time when in Arabs, there was a lot of progress was happening scientifically in the Middle Ages. They used to get manuscripts from India, from China, from all these places, and they used to pay the translators the weight of the manuscript in gold to translate it into Arabic. This was their commitment to translation. This is how eager they were firstly to get the knowledge from other countries and then to translate it into their own languages. And that is when they hit their peak also, when they were doing that kind of work. In India, they have some standard rate. I don't even know what it is, 10 rupees per page. some really absurd rate to translate these things. Nobody's doing it. And the translations that are available are third class. So we cannot rely on the government to do quality work. In fact, I met the government at the highest levels to try to influence them. But more and more, I'm convinced that the people have to understand and the people have to lead the change. The people have to create the demand. They have to demand from the government that we want. Because right now, people cannot demand it because they're also in that myth. They're in the Brahmjal of English. They're saying, no, English is necessary for progress. So therefore, it is good. Government must push English. So it's become this vicious cycle. So the first, and this is the reason why I'm going and talking at different IITs and different places in India to propagate, to remove this first myth that English is necessary for progress. In fact, for India, English has become a barrier to progress for most of the children and most of the people. So to that aim, I have now started a publishing house. It's called Garuda. And Garuda is a vehicle. It's a vahana. So the idea is that this becomes a vehicle for enabling this ecosystem. And of course, this is society's work. It is work of the Samaj. So people come up and support, and we've started a Garuda Udan project where we are identifying key books in engineering, key books in medicine, key books in management, in all these fields, so that we have a ecosystem, and we at least set a bar, and we want this at a very high quality. We want a very high quality bar for these Indian language books. We want a very high quality series of computer science books in Indian language, for instance. We want to have a high quality series of medical books in Indian languages. And the idea is that we just going to turn this off so that it doesn't bother. The idea is that we have we break it by becoming exemplars. So we create an example and say this is possible. We are able to do high quality work, and I'm very proud to announce that one of the key authors of Garuda is Professor H.C. Verma, who did the Concepts of Physics, which is a best-selling physics book in India. And um, I can take a small credit for that book. He himself is now translating into Hindi, and now he is helping supervise the translation of his books in quantum physics that Garuda will bring out as the first quantum physics book at a very high level in Hindi. And we want to invite all the other people who want to write. So my invitation to everybody who's listening to this talk, everybody who listens to this talk at Google and also elsewhere on YouTube, is to, if you have an expertise, come and write for us. Write a book in Indian languages on your area of expertise, whether that's computer science, whether that's medicine, whether that's genetics, what have you. Take your area of expertise. It might be a little bit of work for you, because in the beginning all the technical terminology you are being exposed to is also been in English, but very rapidly you'll see, once the terminology, you go past the barrier of terminology, and there's a lot of work been done on terminology. So terminological dictionaries are there. That work has actually been done by the government in a decent way. So some of that work can be leveraged, but having accessible and high quality books is very, very important. So number way you can support is by contributing your expertise. So definitely contribute your expertise and help the Uran of Garuda. So that will become a seed. And the second way to contribute is to contribute resources. So you can help fund a book. You can say, okay, I will fund the data structures book on computer science. Let's say it's a $5,000, 10,000, somewhere around that range. You can fund a book. So you can fund a book on medicine, you can fund a book on algorithms and data structures, networking, whatever is your field. And then we will identify the people who will do the translation, we will do the design work, we will do the printing, and figure out the distribution. And then after you fund the book, whatever money is made from selling the book later on, we will plow into translating the next book. So the idea is that you start the seed, which is why I'm calling this a seed. That's the beginning. So the people who are committed, who are seeing that this is a way that we can turn, and this is a big civilizational question for us. Are we going to become a satellite English civilization? Yeah, are we going to end up destroying all our languages in 50 years? Because unless the language is connected to economics, unless the language is connected to modernity, unless the language is connected to technology, it's going to wither away, right? So are we going to let all these languages wither away, or are we going to say no, we are going to change the direction that we are taking? And very, very simple way to change the direction is either write on it or help fund the writing on it, and use that as a seed. And Garuda is committing that whatever revenue that is generated after, because right now there is no commercial market for it, so we need to find sponsors to actually fund the initial work. But as soon as that book is starting to get sold, any revenue that is made, any profit that comes from the book will go into the next book. So we want to kind of start this from the beach. From the seed, we'll go into the first series, and from the first series we want to eventually cover the entire ecosystem of knowledge book production. And then as people start to engage, they start to write books, they start to think technology in their language, more call for having higher education in the language, because then that excuse that you can't do higher education because there's no textbooks is going to go away. So that our first hit is to solve that problem. Once you have the textbook, then it is easier for somebody to pick up the textbook and then start teaching in that language. So it enables that next generation of teachers, enables the students, and that's the aim of Garuda. There are a couple of books, this one to the right, and I'm pleased to say that today is the first time I saw a print copy of it. This is the preview second edition of the English Medium Myth that actually landed at the UPS office near Google headquarters just hours ago. And I saw it for the first time. There are a few copies here that you can have, and this is the one on the right, the English Medium Myth. And then the original first edition was Angrezi Madhyam Ka Bhramjal, which was in Hindi. And so both of these books are also available. And please contact me in however way you can contribute. I'm quite active on Twitter. You can follow me at Sankrant. You can email me or go to the website, bhashaniti.org. And the Garuda Udan project, which is bringing science books in Indian languages. Just right now, it's in an alpha stage, so you can go to the URL. It's a very preliminary grpr.in/udan is a short URL. And then you can contribute directly through the website or just through PayPal, and just say, which subject you want to help. If you want to contribute money, you can do that. If you have a book proposal, send me a book proposal, and we will figure out how the resources come so that we can publish the book and at a very high quality level. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for everybody who was on live stream listening. And this change is possible. We start on the journey by saying every long journey begins with the first step. So people say, no, it's too late. The entire ecosystem is in English. How can you change it? It's impossible. It's not too late, because even today, I would say less than 10% of India knows English. Even a much smaller percentage is fluent in English. So even today, you are leaving 90% of the people out. And even in the 10%, if you look at the quality of English that 10% produces, there's only a minuscule amount that actually is so comfortable or so fluent or produces English at a really great level. So it's definitely not too late. But what is necessary is that we take the step today and we go towards that change. Thank you very much. Namaskar. Thank you for listening. Okay. So the question is, one of the issues of having multiple languages in every sector would be finance. For example, the government would have to employ much more workforce to answer in the many languages. How would you look at addressing that problem? Okay, so the question that is being asked is, one of the challenges is just getting the resources. How does the government get these resources? See, I don't think resources is a problem. If you look at let us take the example of translating a book. Okay, let's say we were to translate the top 10,000 books. Okay, and each book is between $5,000 to $10,000, which is a very generous amount for a high quality book. Even if we say $10,000, this is $100 million project to translate 10,000 books. That will cover an enormous corpus of knowledge in major fields in India. Okay, what is 100 million? What is 100 million? It's like 500 crores. What is 500 crores in terms of the budget of the government of India? It's nothing. What is 100 million even for a private fund gathering, right? How much money do we have in Silicon Valley going into different projects, right? So if you look at from a civilizational perspective, the amount of investment is minuscule. It's minuscule. All we need is clarity and commitment. So if you have clarity and commitment for the government to set up these things, yeah, sure, there will be some resistance and you have to set up a structure, set up a system, but the amount of resources are trivial compared to how many more resources you will increase, how many more people you will empower, how you will make India progress, what will be the rate of development of India when people are learning science in their own languages, or what will be the rate of innovation in India when people are learning science in their languages. I mean, today I learned that you cannot even file a patent in India in a language other than English. Now, China is filing thousands of AI patents today in Chinese. And we cannot even file a patent. I mean, how much innovation? And somebody actually, I didn't know about this. Somebody approached me because I was doing this work on language and say, please at least get the government to accept patents in Indian languages. So this is the state we are in. We have completely said, you cannot be creative, you cannot be intelligent, you cannot produce knowledge unless the knowledge is in English. And examples all over the world show that this is false. It's completely false. I mean, Nobel Prize winners are coming out there doing all their work in Japanese, in Russian, in Chinese, in Hebrew, all these languages. And the only question is, are Indian languages and Indian civilization going to be a player on the global stage? Or is it just going to be a little satellite of the Anglosphere?
Expected to be organic demand for multi-translated books, or how will you distribute this?
Okay. So the question is there going to be an organic demand, and how will the distribution happen? So what is happening is, when I've gone to the different IITs, the different institutes in India, I have had hundreds of students gather around at the end of it. And sometimes, like in IIT Roorkee, I was there, and the student came and said, "Sir, pehla lecture hai 3 saal mein jo samajh aaya hai." He's saying, this is the first lecture, because I was speaking in Hindi in all these institutes. He says, this is the first lecture that I understood in 3 years being in IIT Roorkee. So so the demand is from those students who are coming there and they're struggling and they cannot read the English as fast. They're going into medical. Students are committing suicide. They join AIMS and then they cannot cope up with the amount of reading they have to do. Like a few terms in English they can learn, but the entire book being in English becomes very, very difficult. Right. So the demand is firstly going to be from this whole generation of already there is more than 50% even today are studying in Indian languages up to 12th. So their transition to college will be made easier, right? So we are targeting the first year curriculums. The first step is to target the first year curriculums because it will help the transition, and then we keep expanding that, and hopefully at some point the government will also wake up. But the idea is to not just rely on the government, not just say please do it, but to create an alternative, show have a strength coming from society, and then the government is responding to it. Any other questions?
So one issue that is often raised is if we have multiple languages, so then what will happen is the Marathi people will go to Mumbai, and the Hindi-speaking people will go to Kanpur or Delhi, and the Tamil people will go to Madras, and then
This would it.
less interaction between the
So the question that is asked is that if we enable all these languages, it will decrease the interaction. So I have two responses to that. Firstly, when the English were not here, were the people in India talking to each other? So before the British introduced the English language, were the people in India talking to each other? And you find there is voluminous exchange. There is voluminous exchange all over the country. There are seminar. I mean, people are doing Char Dham Yatra. They are traveling. Shankaracharya starts from a village in Kerala. He does a Digvijay Yatra. He goes to all over India. He plants mathas. He's traveling on foot. He must have slept somewhere. He must have eaten somewhere. He must have talked to people. In the entire Digvijay Yatra, there's biographies of Shankaracharya written. Nowhere is it written that language is the big problem in India. So that problem is an artificial problem. And what is the truth is that Indian languages are very easy to learn one from the other. And once one is in that language environment, one quickly picks up another language. In fact, English has become a crutch that is preventing our appreciation of each other's languages. In fact, you will find in the South, more people are multilingual because they are interacting with people from different states, and they're learning each other's languages more rapidly than in the north part, where Hindi has become kind of this dominant force. So what I find is that no, the ecosystem was always there, and it was a Sanskritic ecosystem, but it was also very flourishing in Indian languages. I mean, you see the Kerala School of Calculus, for instance, is doing work in Sanskrit and Malayalam, right? So there is all this work and exchange going on in Indian languages, and that ecosystem was flourishing. In fact, scholars from all over the world came and they would study in India. Like the Hun Sang comes from China. I was there in China. I was seeing this big pagoda, Wild Goose Pagoda. I climbed to the top of it. There's some big treasure on the pagoda. And I go there and they have palm leaf manuscripts in Sanskrit from India. And that is the big treasure that's in the wild loop. So people would come and they would interchange. So that will not happen because to the other answer. So I said, I'll give you two answers. That is the first answer, that the interchange is. Second is, even today, 90% of the people do not move more than 100 kilometers from their village. The reality is 90% of the people in India do not move more than 100 kilometers from their village. So somebody who can learn to be a doctor in Marathi can go back and serve their village and be a doctor in Marathi. When he learns in English, he doesn't want to go back to the village because the English has also taught him that the village is backward and it is bad and so on and so forth. Right? So a child who's in Tamil Nadu and learns to be a doctor, why can't they serve in Tamil? The patient is speaking in Tamil. You are supposed to speak in Tamil to the patient. If you learnt in Tamil, it'll just be easier. Right? So that interchange will also happen, but first we have to empower, and then that is a second order problem that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. No, I mean, the question was more regarding already there is some amount of regionalism in India.
Right.
And won't this just amplify that?
Yes. Well, my feeling is that this will actually decrease regionalism, and I'll tell you why. If you look at, for instance, the very chauvinistic sort of resistance that happens to Hindi, say, right now there was some defacement of Hindi in Karnataka. There have been some resistance in Tamil Nadu, right? That resistance happens because we are not empowering their local language, right? If Tamil was actually being empowered in the High Court, if Tamil was actually being empowered, like today, I cannot go to a bank and fill my form in Tamil. Obviously I'm going to hate Hindi because the stupid Hindi is there in my form, but Tamil is not there, right? If Tamil is there, then I have no reason to resist Hindi or any other language. So my feeling is that once that kind of resistance and regional level and chauvinism comes from a feeling of threat, people are threatened, they feel that their languages are going to be destroyed, so they hang on very tightly to preserve something that they feel is going to be destroyed. When that ecosystem starts to flourish, people will become more open, as they always were. In India, people always learned each other's languages. There was a huge, I mean, if you look at the bhakti movements, the Kashmir Shaivism comes from Kashmir. It spreads all over India, causes all these things to happen. Somebody writes about something in Tamil Nadu, and Kamban is writing in another. So all these things are spreading and they're interacting, and all the stories are intermingling. So all this exchange was very, very. In fact, the whole language as a definition of the state is a European notion, because European nationalism kind of defined ethnicity plus language constitutes a nation. And so they created all this nation state idea and so on. But India was never like that. India was not defined by saying this one language becomes one state. It's a separate, people are separated because of language. I mean, you see Ashoka's pillars on the westernmost borders of Ashoka's empires, the pillars are in Greek. So the Ashokan pillars are in Greek in the west of Ashoka's empire. So it was always multilingual. It was always operating in this mode, and there's not a problem. It doesn't cause reason.
Has there been any? I mean, have you tried marketing this to the more linguistically chauvinist states like Tamil Nadu, and what has been the reaction?
Yes. So I have. Firstly, I'm pleased to announce that the book is now coming out in 6 languages in August, and people have volunteered to translate this. So I'm getting calls from different regions in India, because my book is not advocating one language. It is not saying everybody should learn Hindi or Hindi should be the national language. It does none of that. My book says everybody should be empowered in their mother tongue, and there is a huge positive response to that from the states in the south, from the states elsewhere. So somebody has volunteered and they've translated the book into Kannada. Somebody has volunteered and they've translated the book into Marathi. So all these movements are happening automatically. Gujarati somebody is doing, Punjabi one person is doing. So people are coming up saying this is a great message. This really helps our story. So the regional language people are actually very, very, very positive response from there. Yeah. Anything else? Last question. Any online questions, Ruchi? I'd like to give a big hand to Ruchi for organizing this, taking a lot of initiative and running around, and there's always a bunch of things to do. So great pleasure, and of course I was joyous to have Vineet here. Nothing like connecting back with the old friends. So thank you so much for hosting, and I'm still around to answer questions. And you can the book should be available in the internet on some time. The English Medium Myth. There is an older version available, but a newer one is coming out. I have a few copies here also. But I hope we will. Feel free to email me, and however you want. Please join and help this movement. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you. I was saying that use the technical terminology, not to shift the debate, but the technical terminology. Yeah, which is still true. Because where will you get the technical terminology? If you use the common technical terminology, like Europe is the same with Latin. Like they use all the language, but they use Latin as the technical terminology. All the medical terminology is coming from Latin. Some Greek